What is up, my podcast listeners? This is your host, Rafael Matuszewski, and we're going to get right into it. So today what we're going to go over is why you need mobility training in your fitness routine. So my last episode, we heavily spoke about Kinstretch and why I think it's the missing link. And this is going to be kind of the continuation of it, but more specifically, the gap that I see in people's training overall, especially when it comes to the general population. So every single person that comes see me, they will complain that they hit a plateau, their low back hurts while doing certain exercises, they have a laundry list of injuries that have been accumulating over the years, and every time they go into the gym to get back into shape, get back into the routine of things, it all falls apart. And it's usually because they start overloading one system and the front of their shoulder hurts, their knee starts hurting. You can just insert whatever joint you can think of that would trigger pain. And once I started realizing that a lot of people don't ever train their connective tissue, and I've spoken about this so many times on my podcast and social media posts, you name it, but it's just like anything. If you don't train something, say a good example is that most dudes, they really enjoy doing bench press and bicep curls or just any upper body exercise in general. And I do too. There's nothing cooler than slapping 225 on your bench press and repping it out. But those same people, when it comes to anything legs, especially single leg, give them a split squat, give them a Bulgarian split squat or rear foot elevated split squat, whatever you want to call it, they crumble. And in the eyes and brain of a decent trainer, they would realize that, hey, that's probably the lowest hanging fruit. Let's just get that person doing as much lower body stuff because they're pretty much good on the upper body. And I've seen this with general population, all the dudes that I've trained over the years, upper body, no problem. You give them a set of 55-pound dumbbells, they can press, no problem. They want to row heavy, no problem. But you give them a pair of 20s to do reverse lunges, and after 6 reps, they're like, oh my God, that was the hardest thing ever. And I'm like, you're pressing with 55s, but with a set of 20-pound dumbbells, you crumble. There's already an imbalance there, right? And that's just in traditional strength and conditioning style of training. But when it comes to connective tissue, the stuff that basically holds us together, when that crumbles, that's the only time where you actually train it. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost when it comes to training, because they'll, injure their shoulder, they go to physio or chiro, and then they give them that little band exercise for external rotation of their rotator cuff. And it's kind of dinky, and you're like, this is not really that awesome compared to bench pressing, but you do it anyway, and you're like, okay, now my shoulder starts feeling a little bit better. So the moment your shoulder starts feeling better, you stop doing that rotational work of your rotator cuff that actively focuses on connective tissue stuff, because you think it's good enough to go back to what you were doing previously. But a couple months go by and you're back to square one. What people miss is that rotational band-aid exercise for your rotator cuff, you can progress that. I don't know why people don't think about that. Your rehab exercise that you're doing for connective tissue, you can progress it just like any other exercise. If you're doing dumbbell bench press, the next progression could be an incline, because that's a little bit more difficult. You can do a single arm variation of a press. That's even more difficult because that requires more stability with your upper body. But for some reason, when it comes to your traditional rehab stuff, people don't know how to progress it. And I think that's where a lot of people miss it. So when I train people, depending on where they're at, I might go in the direction of your traditional rehab stuff, aka Kinstretch, to build up a good foundation, and then graduate them to do more strength-based stuff, but still flow that Kinstretch stuff in order to maintain what we've gotten at that point and go beyond it. I just don't understand why people try to put all their eggs in one basket, right? Eventually you're going to hit a capacity limit. And this always, like, I always bring up endurance, because that's like one of the easiest things to understand is that, say you start running today. The first 2 weeks, man, it's going to suck. You're going to be sore, out of breath. But usually after 2 weeks, you start seeing some adaptation. You start seeing that, oh, like, I'm not as gassed. My heart rate doesn't go skyrocket as I start my run anymore. I actually feel like I can push myself. And now say you're consistent at running for like 4 or 5 months, you're kind of good to go at that point. And say that you hit your 1 year mark, say you're training for a full marathon and you run that thing as fast as possible, you feel good after it, and you've kind of now exhausted how much you can get out of your body when it comes to endurance. How do you get an individual like that better? It's not running further, because you're going to end up running for like 6 hours a couple times a week, right? Like, do you really think that's smart training? Like, do I need to be running 10 hours every Sunday because I want to get better at long distance? There is a ceiling effect for everything that we do. If you think that you constantly bench pressing for the last 5 years is going to make you better at bench pressing, probably not. There's other protocols that you should be doing. If you look at strength conditioning research, it's primarily created to figure out how to fight off adaptation. Because as you do a pattern, like the bench press, I always use the bench press because it's the easiest thing that people can relate to. If you do something like the bench press, that pattern you become more efficient at. If you become more efficient at it, then you won't burn as many calories and you won't get a training stimulus in order to improve. So power lifters is a great example. They will constantly look at different protocols to be able to bypass those plateaus. So just like your connective tissue, if you are constantly overloading the musculoskeletal system in, say, the bench press, that shoulder that has a lot of connective tissue deep within inside the capsule doesn't get trained, it's going to hit a limit of how much shit that it can take from your bench press. I see this over and over and over again. And it's funny because, like, I will do an assessment on somebody and, like, I already know that if I just start doing Kinstretch with them for 3 months, they're already going to feel better. Because if you think about it, if you haven't done an active thing in a very long time, it's this brand new stimulus that goes right through your body, and your body goes, whoa, what is this? I need to adapt to this stress. So an example I always give is, like, you know, I will go to the driving range maybe once a year if I get invited out with friends or a client. And I'll hit, I don't know, 100, 200 balls. The next 3 days, I am destroyed. And what do you think my body does? Holy shit, this is a new stress. What the hell is this? We need to adapt as fast as possible so then the next time this happens, we won't be surprised. So if I decided 2 weeks after my first little go at the driving range to do the same thing, maybe I'm only going to be sore for half a day, maybe a day, instead of the 3 where I was like destroyed and couldn't walk, right? So when it comes to introducing someone to Kinstretch for the first time, holy crap, do I see a huge change, in people's pain tolerance, movement, and just quality of life. Like sometimes if I put together a Kinstretch session very thoughtfully, like I will sit down and go, okay, I have these 7 people today, and I want to do this, 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 and this with them because I haven't hit, I don't know, shoulder internal rotation and extension ever. And I find a position where they can comfortably get into. And from there, also, you know, place them in a position where they won't cheat and have full control out of their entire body. Usually the next day they will text me or email me or like, I don't know what we did, but this is the best I ever felt in my life. And it's only because it's tissue that they've never trained. So they're going to get huge amounts of feedback in a positive way. And then I always tell them, like, you know what, that's amazing, but just wait until 6 months to a year from now. Imagine how much better you're going to feel. And I know that everyone wants to be able to go to the gym and lift heavy weights, but you need a prerequisite for that. You kind of need the fuel to be able to do that. And if you have a joint, say your shoulder, your elbow, and your wrists that are not at least functioning at like 70%, you're not really going to get that much out of whatever exercise routine you put together. There's going to be limitations. And I think one of the major ones that I always see and people always comment is like, they'll go through times of the year where their lower back starts flaring up and they get so frustrated because they were just getting into a routine. They were just getting, you know, started and start seeing a flow, and they start seeing improvements in their strength, and then their back kind of does this, or they're like, oh, every time I get out of bed, it really, really hurts. And that's just a great example of how that individual's connective tissue, say, surrounding the lumbar spine, hasn't been trained enough to actually withstand the force that you're putting into it with the barbell deadlift that you're doing. I think a lot of people miss the boat with mobility. They kind of just assume that it's like, oh, I don't need to be flexible as long as I can touch my toes and I'm good to go. But the more that you realize that mobility training is not so much being flexible, it's being able to actively control your body into the positions and movements that you want to achieve in the gym. So imagine the bench press again. Imagine if you had full control of this shoulder joint to do anything that you wanted. And then you go into the bench press and you have more control of that entire joint. Don't you think that would benefit you to be able to generate more force into that bench press? Most likely. I've also seen so many times where people will, complain about low back pain and complain about their squat getting stuck or they can't get low enough, and then I put them on a table to do the FRA, which is kind of Kinstretch's specific assessment tool, and I check their hip internal and external rotation, and they have like none. And then they're like, oh, I don't know why my low back always hurts. And I'm like, well, you have this hip joint that's literally designed to move freely in so many different directions, and you physically can't do it. No wonder your back hurts, because it's taking up the grunt of the work. People's lives would be so much easier if they understood that all they needed to do is have their joints move the way that they're designed. Everything in their life would feel 1,000% better. And I don't know why I'm the only person that takes these people that feel so down on themselves and don't understand why they're not getting better, and then I put them on a table and I can pinpoint why that's happening to them, because their hip external rotation is non-existent and it's super tight, and the moment I put them in that, their whole entire ass feels like it's gonna just stretch and rip apart. And I'm like, that is a lot of like neurological or mechanical tension, but that's a whole nother story. And I start giving them more degrees of freedom through their hip joint, and then everything starts feeling better. And I think I've said this last or a couple episodes ago, where when I have someone consistently coming to see me for a month, doing 1 day a week, every single person that walks through my door and I ask them, how's your body feeling today? Usually after that 1 month mark, they're like, pretty good. It's that simple. Don't skip out on mobility work. Like, it goes hand in hand, you know? I don't understand why people think it's not important. Like, for me, I try to find, as much as I can, the stuff that I suck at when it comes to fitness. Because I know that if I do that stuff, I'm going to get better on a whole. Right? Like, if you ask the average person, like, do you ever train zone 1 and zone 2 of your heart rate? And they're like, most people are like, I don't even know what that means. But once you understand and realize that, oh, maybe heart health is also important, because that's part of the internal system. And if I only train my heart rate at the max because I'm in some sort of fitness class where I hop on an Airdyne bike and try to go max effort every single time, I'm bleeding into a section of my energy system where I'm going to hit a limit. So why not train the opposite spectrum, where I try to keep my heart rate under 120 beats per minute while I go jogging? Like, that's fucking hard if you've never done it before. You'll get to a point where you'll be walking and your heart rate might be getting up to 140 beats per minute. Like, how are you supposed to recover? Right? I think the whole point of this episode that I'm trying to get at is train the stuff that you don't train. Easy. Like, most people don't train any lateral lunge variation in their programming because it's just easier to lunge. You're already overloading one system. You know, most people like pressing, but they don't do enough rowing. Like, how many big dudes and gals out there that can press a lot horizontally and pull a lot horizontally, but you put them under a pull-up bar and they can't even do 1 rep? Like, that's already a huge imbalance. Like, just focus on that. But the reason why I'm so passionate about mobility work is that the internal stuff is more important than the external stuff, right? I think you and I can both agree that our heart and lungs are pretty important. If those two things weren't working the way they should, it doesn't matter what you do in the gym, because all of it is going to be limited based on those two organs. And then if you go to the next layer of like your joint, doesn't matter how much functional training you do, you're eventually going to hit a plateau because your joint dictates what area you can move your shoulder, your knee, your ankle in. So why not train those things that no one ever focuses on? You'll see huge, huge improvements. I'm going to stop it there because I can just ramble about this forever and I want to keep this under 20 minutes. But this would be a perfect time to talk about my online Kinstretch platform. So for all those people who are not local, that can't physically see me, I have now, I think, over 36 fully recorded Kinstretch workouts on my online platform, where you literally click play and it's me teaching you the whole routine and taking you through it. So literally all you have to do is press play and follow along. And you'd be surprised that if you were consistent at least one of these workouts per week, in a month you would already feel better. Literally. And the cool thing on there is that you can pick, oh, I only have 15 minutes today. There's, I don't know, several 15-minute Kinstretches on there. You're like, you know what, I have a little bit more time. Maybe a 30-minute one would actually work. I have a bunch of little 30-minute Kinstretches in there. If you have a lot of time, hit the 1 hour ones. Like I literally have so many from 15 minutes all the way to a full hour that you can do. And all you have to do is click play, and all you really need is floor space, a yoga block, maybe a band. All you need. And if you were really short on time, you can literally do the cars routine every single day for 5 minutes, and you'd also see some great improvement with joint health and overall quality of life. So I'm going to leave that in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's going to be in the description. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, you should. And follow me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn, because I post a lot of stuff that's super helpful when it comes to building a better body that's pain-free and strong. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Until next time.